Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about World War II. And this is going to be a fairly long video, so just be prepared for that. I'm going to try to be as concise as possible when I'm talking about this. World War II is a very expansive topic, and so there's a lot to say on the subject. So some introductory facts to start off. Largely considered by most scholars to be, and historians to be, the worst war in history. It killed more people, destroyed more property, disrupted more lives, and had more far-reaching consequences than any other war in history, because it really is a truly global war, and you'll see that on a map in a little bit. So it brought down the downfall of Western Europe as the center of world power and led to the rise of the Soviet Union. Definitely arguable that the rise, or the center of at least the commercial world, but as also political and military power, was definitely in Western Europe as far as the greatest power. That shifted after World War II to two polarizing zones, the United States and the Soviet Union. The development of the atomic bomb, also in World War II, opens up the nuclear age. The exact number of people killed will never be known. Military deaths total around 17 million. Civilian deaths were either greater as a result of starvation, bombing, raids, massacres, epidemic, other related causes. And we don't have an accurate count globally on the civilian deaths. The battlefield spread to nearly every part of the world, from tropical jungles to the Arctic. So World War II begins on September 1st, 1939, and ends on September 2nd, 1945. And this is a map of the conflict. So in red here, all of these countries, this is where like actual boots are on the ground and people are actually fighting. The pink here, people in these zones participated, bombed, or had limited contact. Yes, there were some bombs / balloons with bombs that were dropped in this region. I think there was maybe like one civilian death in like Oregon or something like that. Anyways, just one really unlucky guy. That's the pink zones. They participated, limited conflict in their zones. Orange, countries like the United States participated in, but there's no real fighting on their own soil. They're sending soldiers to fight in the war. And gray are the countries that are neutral. And if you look at this map, I mean, there are very few countries, respectively, that are neutral in this conflict. This is truly a world war. Okay, some of the causes of World War II. The Treaty of Versailles was very unfair to the Germans, and the Americans had proposed an easier path that would not be so hard on Germany, but that was shot down in favor of the Treaty of Versailles. And not only were they expected to pay back huge reparations for World War I, but then the global economy crashes, and not only are European countries or American countries affected, but there is a global economic depression that occurs in between the wars. World War I severely damages the economies in Europe. Both winners and losers came out deeply in debt, with devastated countrysides. And World War I was a battle of attrition, where they used all of their country's resources to pour into the war effort. And the war is only won after Germany effectively loses its ability to fight anymore. The defeated powers had difficulty paying reparations to the victors. Losing nations eventually tried to solve their problems by territorial expansion. Germany is a prime example of this. Germany, the hyperinflation is so bad, the value of their money is completely wiped out, and there's images of people using wheelbarrows full of money to buy loaves of bread and things like that. And you'll see some images here in a little bit. By 1923, the German economy was on the verge of total collapse. Only loans from the U.S. restored order to Germany a little bit. The Great Depression begins in the U.S. in 1929, but it spreads to Europe, weakens democracies across the globe, and gives rise to dictatorships promising to end economic difficulties. If you cannot feed your family, and someone tells you that if you give them power, they will fix the economy and allow you to feed your family, if your children are starving, these types of regimes look attractive. And this is how these individuals end up rising to power. Okay, so here's a few images. German banknotes being pulped for use as waste paper, so they're using it literally as toilet paper. This is German money being used to light a stove in Berlin, August 1923. These are wheelbarrows full of, just stacked with cash, with people going to the store to buy basic goods. German story from 1923, a man rushed out with a wheelbarrow to spend his wages and left it outside a shop loaded with money. When he came back out of the shop, the wheelbarrow was gone and the wages had been dumped on the ground. In other words, the wheelbarrow itself was worth more at that point than the actual currency. Okay, and with this economic downturn and with the reparations and the low morale of the German people comes a rise in what is called nationalism. It is an unhealthy type of patriotism where you foreigners or anyone who is not of your original nationality to be less human than you are. It is going beyond saying that my country is great and I'd be proud to serve my country. It goes well beyond that type of patriotism to, well, my country is the greatest, and therefore everyone else who belongs to another country or another nation or another ethnic people group is less human in some way than I am. And it is a very, very dangerous road to go down, as we'll see in World War II with the rise of the Nazi Party, which is the National Socialist Party. This is a nationalist party. The more people felt loss of national honor, the more they desired revenge. This went hand in hand with a strong desire to see their countries grow militarily powerful. So Germany had a long-standing reputation for hundreds of years, the Germanic region, of being strong and independent and militarily powerful, etc. And that has been taken away from them with the Treaty of Versailles. In the 1930s, Germans enthusiastically support a nationalist organization called the National Socialist Party, or Nazis. In 1933, Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party, is appointed Chancellor of Germany. He's actually elected to this position. A little background: Hitler actually tries to come into power. He ends up getting arrested. He goes to prison. He writes a book called Mein Kampf, which is essentially a plan to take over the world. I've actually looked over it, and it is like if the leaders globally had read Mein Kampf, they might have treated Hitler differently as he started to take territory over. We'll see with Neville Chamberlain's appeasement policy, that did not work. We'll get back to that. Okay, so Hitler is elected to this position. He comes to power legally, and he takes the title of Der Führer, the leader, and soon made Germany a dictatorship. Okay, he vows to ignore the Treaty of Versailles, avenge Germany's defeat, and make Germany strong again and bring back national pride, and also fix the economy. And he did actually fix the economy and ignore the Treaty of Versailles, and he actually followed through on a lot of his promises initially. So it wasn't like he came to power, didn't fulfill any of his promises, and then started this Holocaust and genocide, and people just let him do it. No, he became popular because he actually did follow through with what he said he was going to do. But then he used his popularity and his power, as well as, extremely aggressive propaganda campaign, to desensitize the German people enough to carry out Holocaust. And that's an in-depth topic maybe for another time, but it didn't happen overnight. There were slow steps that led to what happened in Nazi Germany in World War II. But it starts with support based on actual promises being fulfilled. Hitler preached that the Germans were a superior race, and that such races as the Jews and Slavs were inferior. Slavs, the Russian people are Slavs, but then also the ancient tribal people, the Slavic people from Eastern Europe is who we're talking about here. He begins a campaign of hatred against them, as well as communists, and promised to get rid of them. Communists and nationalists are the exact complete polar opposites of the political spectrum. Communism is saying that individualism is wrong and the state should run everything, etc. They are the far left of the political spectrum. Nationalism, or the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, are the far right end of the political spectrum. Okay, and with the rise of the Nazi Party, you have charismatic leaders who are standing up in groups and giving these speeches and telling the German people everything that they want to hear, that they are not worthless, they are worth something, they are a great people, they deserve to be prosperous, and they are the greatest people and nation on earth, and all these things that, if you're a German who's in the middle of a depression and you have suffered the defeat of World War I, sounds really, really good and feels good. And this is one of the reasons why the nationalists are able to gain power during this time. Okay, this is Hitler and the brown shirts. This group, some of the original Nazis, these guys are thugs basically that follow Hitler around and spread propaganda and basically enable him to speak and give speeches and help him rise into power. Okay, so you see these type of gatherings, and then once he comes into power, you see these types of gatherings where you've got thousands upon thousands of people in these grand spectacles where Hitler is giving these speeches to thousands upon thousands. And Hitler had a speaking style that it's one of those things that you have to see to understand. But even, I don't speak German, but it is captivating the way that he delivers a speech. It's very passionate. It is full of enthusiasm in a way and fervor that I've never seen anyone else speak like Hitler. He was a he was one of the best public speakers in modern times, but he was also evil. So he captivates the German people. He's elected to power. He promises, all these good things. He starts to follow through on these promises, but then he also starts the extermination of the Jewish people, but also not just the Jewish people, but all people that he believed to be inferior. In Italy, there was another nationalist group, fascist group, that is rising to power under a man named Benito Mussolini. And how he comes to power is interesting. The trains and the transportation network in Italy were having difficulties running on time. It was causing disruption of business. And Mussolini said, give me one day, and the story goes, as far as I know it, he said, give me a day and I will fix the problem. And what he did was he had guys go to the train conductor, point a gun to their head, and said, if you don't move this train and get to each of your stops on time, I'm going to kill you. And it was obviously very effective. The trains ran on time and the problem was solved, and Mussolini was seen as someone who could be trusted. And then in the Soviet Union, you have Joseph Stalin taking over for Lenin. And Stalin is one of the most ruthless, villainous characters that has ever existed in world history. He rules through brutality, cruelty, and fear. And as a communist, he hates the Nazis as much as they hated him. Japan, you have a military government coming to power, which glorified war and the training of warriors, as part of a Bushido culture. Here you have Hitler and Benito Mussolini riding together in a vehicle. Okay, and this is I struggle with these names. Hideki Tojo, I believe, is how it is pronounced. One of the leaders in Japan. And then this is Joseph Stalin. Okay, World War II. So dictators begin to expand their power and influence. Japan, Italy, Germany follow a policy of territorial expansion, and dictators knew what they wanted and simply took it. I mean, like I said, Hitler writes in Mein Kampf, like his plan to take over. It's very detailed. They know what they want, and they're going to execute their plans. The democratic countries respond timidly and with indecision. You've got these countries who have just faced the worst crisis in memory with World War I, and they are hesitant to engage themselves in any further military conflict after World War I. Japan is the actual first nation of these ones to start conquering and taking over territory. In 1931, they seized Manchuria, in a province in northern China, rich in natural resources. There's a movie on this called The Last Emperor. Some historians consider this the technical beginning of World War II. We usually start it with Germany because most history books in the West are Western centered. I would definitely argue that the invasion of Manchuria is the start of World War II, but most historians would disagree with me placing it in Germany. And we'll talk about that expansion here a little bit. In 1937, Japan launches a major attack on China. It had conquered most of eastern China by 1938. Again, there's another Hollywood movie, or maybe not Hollywood. Anyways, it's called The Empire of the Sun. Italy attacks African countries. And by the way, on this invasion of Manchuria, you'll see an image come up here in a little bit. The way that the Japanese treated the civilians in their invasion was one of the most horrific and brutal takeovers in modern times. When they take the city of Nanking, that event in and of itself is called the Rape of Nanking. And the things that the Japanese did to the Chinese people were absolutely horrifying. I almost couldn't find any images that were appropriate for YouTube. there's one that you will see, and it kind of signifies the entire Japanese campaign in China. It was brutal and terrible, and some of the worst atrocities in all of human history occur in this area perpetuated by the Japanese. Moving back to Italy. Okay, Italy focuses on taking over African countries. We're coming at the end of the imperialist era, where the Europeans had carved up the planet, specifically Africa, but also other areas around the world, and in the Pacific, and places like the Philippines and Hawaii, but also places in South America. Anyways, so Italy is continuing this imperialist policy. They attack one of the few independent nations, Ethiopia. So Ethiopia had remained independent. They used machine guns, tanks, airplanes to overwhelm and overpower the Ethiopian army, which had outdated rifles. They had outdated military equipment. They were not prepared for the industrial age militarily, and conquer Ethiopia by May of 1935. Also held Libya and Tunisia. You'll see an image of those in a bit. This is the Japanese invasion and occupation of Manchuria up here, but then these provinces and in the north and the south. I do want to note that probably 90% ish of China's population lives on the coast here, and this is a giant desert. This is like the Himalayan mountains and a very mountainous region, and is really this area that is the most habitable in China. And so the majority of people live near the coast, and so that's where the Japanese actually take over. So there was a lot of atrocities that happen every place that China actually takes over. Okay, so Japanese soldiers, they're using modern machine guns and military equipment in their invasion. And this is the image that I referenced earlier from the rape of Nanking. It's just absolutely horrifying. Okay, and this is Italy. They had controlled Libya, Somalia, etc. But then they come in and take Ethiopia. Okay, 1935, Italy invades Ethiopia and Africa. Mussolini wanted new areas to expand his empire in Africa. Okay, growing more territory equals more access to natural resources, etc. And then there is a civil war that occurs in Spain from 1936 to 1939, and this becomes a testing ground for fascist military equipment. Begins when many of Spain's army officers revolt against the government. The army rebels under General Francisco Franco as their leader. He's a nationalist, like Hitler, like Mussolini, etc. While their forces, so Franco's forces were known as nationalists, while the forces behind the democratic government were called loyalists. Hitler and Mussolini sent troops, weapons, advisors, etc. to aid Franco. Great Britain, France, U.S., none of the democratic nations wanted to get involved because of the reasons I stated earlier. They didn't want any wars for a while after World War I. The last loyalist forces surrender in April of 1939. Franco sets up a dictatorship that lasts until 1975. The reason why this is really, really important is because Hitler, specifically, but Mussolini as well, use this war as a testing ground for new weapons, and they send these new weapons to see how effective they are. Take lessons learned to develop more advanced weaponry that they then use to conquer Europe. Hitler and Mussolini, like I said, used it to test and try new tactics. And so, they're testing new tanks and airplanes and battleships and cannons and rifles, etc. Okay. So, Spanish Civil War, I'm not going to really get into this. Initial nationalist zone here is in the northwest, spans other places. They gain territory. The Republican zone or loyalist zone here is in red, and the Republicans or loyalists end up losing this fight. And one of the things to come out of this is when the city of Guernica is attacked and being attacked. Pablo Picasso paints what is probably his most famous work called Guernica, and it is a twisted horror depicting the bombing and bombing of Guernica and the war that occurs in that city. It is drawn in and painted in this way intentionally and purposefully to be sickening and horrifying and difficult to look at, because that's what he's trying to portray. It's the things that happened in this city were sickening and horrifying, and you've got these bombs going off and people being twisted and mangled and animals being contorted. And it's terrifying. This painting was actually banned in Spain during this time period. Okay, images like that. Okay, appeasement. Hitler takes over Austria. In March of 1938, Hitler took over Austria peacefully. Okay, basically he marches in, and the idea here is the Germans and Austrians are similar. They end up going along with it. Ish. I mean, they weren't really given a choice because they didn't have the military equipment to oppose the Nazis. So Germans end up annexing Austria. Many of them are happy to be merged with Germany. Movie The Sound of Music, if you've never seen it, it's a great movie. Go watch it. It's about this event. Okay, and then there's also the taking over of Czechoslovakia. There's a nation made up of many nationalities, including more than 3 million Germans living in the western part in an area called the Sudetenland. So this area, Hitler argues that the Germans have a right to this area because there are German people there, so it belongs in Germany. So they start putting pressure on Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia, a tiny democracy determined to stand up to the growing power. As tension mounts, Britain's Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, tries to restore calm. He was to pursue peace and preserve it at all costs. He believed that giving Hitler what he wanted could prevent war. So he's like, well, let's negotiate. Let's just give him what he wants this one time, and he'll be happy, and that'll be the end of it. This policy became known as appeasement. So this is Hitler shaking hands with not Hitler, but a Nazi shaking hands with the Austrian and taking over. And these are the images coming out of the annexation of Austria, where people are seen holding up Nazi flags as he's marching down the streets. I mean, a lot of this is propaganda, but he didn't take Austria through conflict. Okay, and this is a good map. You see Germany, Austria, and then Czechoslovakia here, and the Sudetenland region that Hitler would like to take over because of the amount of German people that live there. I mean, it's pretty obvious why. I mean, you've got Germany, and then it's bumping up right next to Czechoslovakia. Of course, there's going to be some overlap between people groups in this region. So Neville Chamberlain tries several meetings with Hitler, and Europe is at the brink of war. At each meeting, Hitler made greater and greater demands, and each time Chamberlain gives in to them. Great Britain, along with France, agrees to turn over this region in Czechoslovakia to Germany. They force Czechoslovakia to accept the agreement called the Munich Agreement. So they force Czechoslovakia, basically saying, like, if you want to go to war with Germany, good luck, you're on your own unless you go along with his demands. And Czechoslovakia didn't have the military strength to fight Germany all by themselves at this point. So Hitler promised that he had no more territorial ambitions. He's like, this is all I want, give me what I want, and we're fine. So Chamberlain returns to England, proclaiming that he has achieved peace for his generation. The failure of appeasement soon becomes clear. Hitler breaks the agreement and takes over the rest of Czechoslovakia anyways. So, in 1939. The democracies did nothing to protest. They just let him have it. They don't go and help out. This is Neville Chamberlain. He's very happy with himself. Yeah, things didn't turn out well for him. And this is one of my favorite political cartoons by a well-known artist that you might have heard of. His name is Dr. Seuss. And prior to penning children's not cartoons, but children's books, he was actually a political cartoonist during World War II. And so here you see the appeaser sitting in the middle of a lake or ocean, surrounded by Nazis, giving the Nazis lollipops to this Hydra. And yes, if you're wondering, the Marvel reference to Hydra is actually talking about the Nazi Party, and it is in reference to that in the Marvel comic books. World War II begins. You know what? We are going to stop there. This video is long enough, and we will pick up there in the next video. Have a good day. Bye.